Unpeeled, Baboon Breakout Revisited. Chapter 1. It was a bright and sunny day, the kind that brings a smile to your face and a skip to your step. The neighborhood was bustling with activity as children played and neighbors chatted on their porches. In one particular house, a man sat at the kitchen table, his mind far away from the sounds of the world outside. His name was Jake, formerly known as Ted, and to some Slash or Ted/Jake, and he was a husband and father. He had lived a life full of adventure, including a wild road trip years before with his friends Dave and Chris. But despite all the memories he had made, Ted/Jake couldn't help but feel like there was something missing. As he sat there, lost in thought, his wife entered the room and tried to remind him of their children's names, but to Ted/Jake's surprise, he couldn't recall them. The more he tried to remember, the more confused and frustrated he became. And so begins a journey of self-discovery and laughter as Ted/Jake sets out to uncover the truth about his past and the family he had forgotten. Algernon, Ebenezer, Flipper, Gulliver, Harlequin, Ichabod, Jasper, Kipper, and Lambert, she listed off, growing increasingly frustrated with each name. Ted/Jake scratched his head, trying to jog his memory. Wait, are you saying I have 9 kids? His wife nodded, her arms crossed in front of her chest. You named them, she exclaimed. Ted/Jake's eyes widened in shock. He thought back to the wild road trip he and his friends, Dave and Chris, had taken years before. The memories came flooding back, but he couldn't quite recall the names of his own offspring. Okay, he said, holding up his hands in surrender. Just give me a second to think. He closed his eyes, trying to focus. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, making him jump. He stood up, hoping that perhaps one of the kids had come home early from school. But when he opened the door, he found not one of his children, but 2 young men standing on his porch. Excuse me, sir, one of them said. Are you Jake, formerly known as Ted? Ted/Jake frowned, unsure of how to answer. Yes. The 2 young men exchanged a look before the first one spoke up again. We're Algernon and Ebenezer, he said, pointing to each of them in turn. Ted/Jake's eyes went wide. Wait, you're my kids? Algernon and Ebenezer nodded. Yes, sir, they said in unison. Ted/Jake couldn't believe it. He had completely forgotten about them. The realization made him feel like a terrible father, but at the same time, he couldn't help but find the whole situation a little bit funny. He invited Algernon and Ebenezer inside, and the 3 of them sat down at the kitchen table where Ted/Jake's wife was still waiting, her arms crossed in front of her chest. Okay, Ted/Jake said, taking a deep breath. I guess I owe you guys an explanation. And with that, he launched into the story of the road trip that had changed his life forever. He explained how he, Dave, and Chris had gone gorilla and imitated monkeys, and how that wild behavior had led him to change his name and gave him minor to severe brain damage, causing his memory issues. The whole story was full of twists and turns, and Algernon and Ebenezer couldn't help but laugh at their dad's antics. In the end, they all agreed that life was a little crazy, but a whole lot of fun. Ted/Jake made his way down the aisle of the grocery store, his cart creaking with each turn. He hummed a tune to himself, feeling a sense of comfort in the familiarity of the mundane task. As he perused the shelves, he couldn't help but think back to his days as simply Ted. Life had been so predictable and ordinary back then. But ever since the wild road trip he took with his friends Dave and Chris, things had never quite been the same. He chuckled to himself as he remembered the craziness of that trip, the monkey impressions, the spontaneous dance parties, and the countless memories they had made. And of course, the 9 children he had named Algernon, Ebenezer, Flipper, Gulliver, Harlequin, Ichabod, Jasper, Kipper, and Lambert. Ted/Jake shook his head, still finding it hard to believe that he had forgotten about them for so many years. But now, he was determined to be the best father he could be. He reached for a can of beans and tossed it into his cart, smiling as he thought about the surprises life had in store for him. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for anything. After all, he was Ted/Jake, a man with a wild spirit and a heart of gold. Suddenly, his phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He fished it out of his pocket and answered without looking at the caller ID. Hello? He said, still scanning the shelves for inspiration. Hey, Ted/Jake, it's Dave. What are you up to? Ted/Jake's eyes lit up as he heard his friend's voice. I'm at the grocery store trying to figure out what to buy for dinner. Oh man, that sounds thrilling. Want some company? Ted/Jake chuckled. Sure, why not? A few minutes later, Dave arrived at the grocery store and the two of them made their way through the aisles, picking out ingredients for a stir-fry. Ted/Jake was in his element, chatting and joking with his friend and scanning the shelves for interesting finds. As they turned a corner, they spotted a display of bubble wrap. Ted/Jake's eyes went wide as he ran over, grabbing a handful of the protective packaging and popping the bubbles between his fingers. Dave laughed, joining in on the fun. The two of them took turns popping bubbles, making as much noise as possible and causing the other shoppers to stare in disbelief. After they finished their shopping, they headed to the checkout, their carts overflowing with groceries and bubble wrap. Ted/Jake grinned from ear to ear, feeling happy and carefree. As they made their way to the car, Ted/Jake's phone rang again. He answered without looking, still in a good mood from his bubble wrap fun. Hello, he said. Ted/Jake, this is your wife. What did you do at the store? Ted/Jake's smile faded as he realized he was in trouble. Just some grocery shopping, he said, trying to sound casual. His wife's tone was suspicious. And the bubble wrap? Ted/Jake chuckled nervously. Oh, that's just for fun. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Just for fun? Ted/Jake winced, knowing he was in for it when he got home. But for now, he was content to bask in the joy of his grocery store adventure. Ted/Jake was just about to hang up the phone with his wife when he heard a loud honking behind him. He realized it was Chris, waving wildly in his brand-new bright yellow sports car. Ted/Jake chuckled and shook his head, making his way to greet his friend. Hey, old pals! Chris yelled as Ted/Jake and Dave approached the car. Need a ride? Ted/Jake rolled his eyes and grinned. I think I can manage the 5 feet to my own car, thanks. Hop in, boys, Chris yelled. You're in for a ride. Ted/Jake and Dave exchanged a look, both feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. They knew Chris could be a wild driver, but they also trusted him. As they climbed into the car, Chris took off with a screech of tires, leaving the parking lot in a blur of speed. Ted/Jake and Dave grabbed onto their seatbelts, their stomachs dropping as the car swerved and zoomed through the streets. Hold on tight! Chris yelled, his laughter filling the car as he took them on a high-speed thrill ride through the city. The atmosphere was electrifying, with the wind rushing past them and the engine roaring as they zoomed through traffic. But as the ride went on, Ted/Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Chris was driving recklessly, darting in and out of lanes and cutting off other drivers. He was pushing the car to its limits, and Ted/Jake started to feel like they were in over their heads. Chris, slow down, he called out. But Chris just laughed and accelerated even faster, sending the car hurtling down the highway. Ted/Jake and Dave were both terrified, but they were also powerless to stop their friend. It seemed like they were in for a wild and dangerous ride.